Let's see. Okay, I think it's going live. Where's your smiling face?
Right here.
Here, I'm going to get all these email notifications so I don't close my email here. So, hi, Dylan. Thanks for coming on the stream. To everybody who's watching so far, nice to see everybody. Happy Friday. Dylan, have you ever been live for your followers before?
I don't think I have, actually. So yeah, this is a new thing for me as well.
Wait, hang on. It says, it looks like this event was canceled on LinkedIn. You'll need to create a new broadcast or remove this destination and re-add it. I've never had that happen before. Let me see what LinkedIn says. Does it say anything about it? Are you able to see it?
We're still live. I just went and opened the stream and we're still live.
Okay. That's super weird. Oh, it says that's super weird. Okay. I guess maybe we just had an error. It says we're live now. Anyways, I would love to hear how you got into the data space. Do you even consider yourself in the analytics space or more just like the data space in general?
Data space in general. Should I do an intro first, I guess?
Yeah.
Sure. So for those who don't know me and who have joined anyway, thank you for joining. And Dylan Anderson, I'm a lead data strategy consultant at Red Kite. And so as Annie is about to dig into, I've been in the data space for quite a few years, but also on the strategy consulting side. So done a lot in business and strategy consulting, which has also led to data analytics because that is a key driver of strategy. So yeah. And now I'll let you go, Annie.
Yeah, I had looked over your profile and had said like you were a backpacker and like a blogger, and then you got, I feel like that even your first step of getting into just consulting, like business consulting, like that's kind of like a big first step even, and now you're doing the data strategy. So like kind of what brought you into the data space?
So my first introduction to data was in university back in like 2015, and I did a course in R. And when I did that course in R, I kind of saw the power of programming and programming languages, especially more than Excel. And it kind of opened my eyes to that. But then as I graduated from undergrad, I went into strategy consulting, and the data space wasn't there yet. So a lot of companies weren't investing, especially in the consulting space. So I did pure strategy consulting, and I kind of left the my R expertise on the side and never kind of got back into it. And then a few years ago, when I did my master's, I actually then re-entered and started doing quantitative analysis with R around elections. So I did election analytics and I built a portfolio on that and wrote my dissertation using R and everything. And that's kind of when I re-entered the data space and was like, okay, I actually want to do data-driven consulting and link the two together, both on the data side and the strategy side. And that's what I've been doing for the past 2.5 years.
I realized as you were talking that some of your followers might be surprised, like I was, to hear your voice, because I was 100% expecting a British accent and then an American accent.
No, not American Canadian. So,
okay. Well,
but
technically it's
like
still
the
in
same.
North
It's pretty
America.
much the same thing. Yeah, it's very Americanized accent. Yeah, no, I moved to the UK about 3.5 years ago.
That's Canadian.
Yeah, there we go. And but I'm from Toronto, born and bred in Toronto, and like for me, like the next biggest place to go other than Toronto was either New York or London, and I was like, I want to go to London, and I love it here. It's an awesome city for anyone who's been there or hasn't been there.
So when you were not doing specifically data strategy consulting, what's kind of the difference? Like, what would you say is kind of the difference between like what people are looking for when they hire a consultant, like a business, versus like specifically when they hire you, which you do now, which is data strategy?
So business consulting is like pure strategy. So you have a business problem. You're like, I want to make more money, or I want to set up my marketing strategy to target key customers.
Yeah.
And that then they go to a consulting agreement because that's a lot of strategic thinking. It's a lot of problem solving. It's doing a lot of research online, understanding what is out there, what the competitive set is, what the customers are looking for. And that used to be 5 years ago, a lot of desktop research, a lot of strategic thinking, like some Excel, like quite a bit of Excel. but it wasn't really data driven because no company was set up to do that kind of stuff. Nowadays, consultants tend to have a lot more of those analytical skills and data driven skills, but they still don't use Python, R, SQL on a daily basis in the strategy. On the data side, and I'm talking about pure data consulting, that is the foundation is knowing a programming language and knowing it well. And you can get hired at any kind of big consultancy on the data team if you know how to work with Python, do pretty good at problem solving, and know how to communicate. Where I kind of sit, and I think you alluded to this, is the middle, where I know how to code in R, I understand the data world, but I also understand the strategic side. And that is a very lonely space right now, because getting that experience is quite difficult because it takes a lot of years and a lot of dedication to be like, okay, I want to learn R or Python, but I also want to understand how business works and business models work and such.
So how do you, like, you had that kind of strategy background, but like, I don't know, I think that stuff is really interesting. But if I were to look at a JD for a role like yours, I think I'm like miles away from that. Like, how do you get into a role like that?
Yeah, it's tough. I think it's a lot of paying attention to the business and helping solve business problems. And I think anyone can do it in their role, but you really have to work beyond the data team. You have to collaborate with others in the organization and be like, hey, what are your goals? Like, hey, marketing team, what do you want to do? And they're like, oh, well, we want to better target our customers. And you have to think, okay, I can help you with that with data. But then also thinking about side of the data stuff, like, let's do some problem solving on how you do that strategically, or what are the processes to do that. What people do we need to work with to make that happen? So you need to think more holistically, and also just involve yourself in the business decision and the business strategy. And that just means talking to business stakeholders. And I think by doing that, you can get yourself involved in a lot of those projects that aren't only data specific, but they're more kind of general and strategic in nature. And I think that's the key to getting that experience, but it does require initiative.
Yeah, and something that I noticed about you is I saw your resume. For anyone wondering, we had published this resume book with some other like content creators that we had our resumes and tips, and you were really good at articulating that you had like the things that you had done, because it's not just saying, hey, marketing, what do you want to accomplish, but it's being able to say, I help marketing accomplish this in a way that works on a resume, you know?
Yeah, totally. Like, one of my key things, it was one of my first projects. I worked for a brewery in Canada, and that was an awesome client, I have to say. And we were like, I actually used R in that project. I did the data analysis saying, hey, like, what are the next biggest beers out there that we need to like go into? And like, everyone was like talking about ciders and like RTDs, which are ready to drink, and like radlers and stuff. And then, so we're like, oh, we're going in. This is like what it means. But then there's that additional element of like, okay, going to the factory, understanding the operations of it, understanding how people work within the thing. And you realize actually they couldn't operationalize this. They couldn't actually feasibly do this, even though the data pointed to it. So I think the big thing for me, and that was on my resume, but what I'm calling out is the fact that like, when you have a project like that, when you do something like that, and it's like, okay, that demonstrates problem solving. And that is really what I try to bring to these projects, and what you want to demonstrate on a resume. You want to be like, okay, this is how I went past the easy choice, but actually figured out what worked for the business, and it drove results in this way.
That's really interesting, because I think you've got a lot of people, when people talk about like strategy and data-driven decision making in the data space, they talk about how a lot of businesses are going off of like gut feeling or something, and it's like, no, you need to be data-driven. And it sounds like you went the next step, and you were like, yes, we're going to go off of, instead of gut, we're going to use the numbers and everything, the data, but then we're going to go one step further to like bring the human back into it and bring the reality back into it of like, oh, well, you can say that you need to make this as much as you want, but if the operations aren't set up for it, it's just simply not going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard people circle all the way back around to the human before, from like into data and then circle back around. I think you're the first that I've heard that from.
Well, because we don't talk about it. I mean, if you look on LinkedIn, it ends at like, get business stakeholders and talk to their insights. And it's like, okay, it doesn't really tell you how. And then a lot of other people who do the coding, they're just like, okay, learn these skills. So it really, you have to take a holistic approach, and it is about stepping back. And I think people in data have a hard time stepping back because you're in the weeds all the time, building these platforms, building these dashboards, working with the code. And you need to sometimes step back and be like, hey, like, let's think about the wider business problem. If I'm selling these new shoes, I need to source it from what countries? What are the legal implications of that? Like, what does that mean? Even though this might be the best-selling shoe, it might be impossible to get because it's being made in Russia, and there's currently sanctions in Russia and stuff like that. So you have to think about it really holistically to actually get to the right answer. Because often what happens, and this is what creates a lot of issues in businesses, is like people in the data team don't think that way. And then therefore they pose something to like the sales or marketing team, and the marketing team is like, no, that's dumb. Like, obviously we can't sell those shoes because we have sanctions against Russia, and that's where they're made. And the data team is like, oh, well, the data told me to do it, but it doesn't include that whole entire context.
I wonder if, and you can tell me about your thoughts on this. Part of the reason that it's not talked about like on LinkedIn and stuff is because someone pointed out to me recently, it's that Benford.
Yeah.
He had said that we have this thing in the data space where people are mistaking good marketing for thought leadership. And I see that all the time now. Now that he said it. But I think that like good marketing is different than thought leadership, but like good marketing is saying, oh, like work with us. We're going to do these things with your data. We're going to come up with these really stellar answers and results for you. And I wonder if it's almost kind of like a much less sexy thing to say, then we're going to consider the human aspect of it. Like I feel like it's probably a lot harder to market that than just saying, I'm going to use R and I'm going to fix all your problems for you.
Yeah, it's so true, honestly. I mean, if I was to give anyone advice on how to get a job in data right now, I'd say do data governance, because no one wants to do it. It's the most unsexy thing out there, but it's the thing that every company needs right now. And companies are starting to realize that. But that doesn't sell. Like, it doesn't sell like saying, oh, go learn SQL or go to learn Python.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you expand more on like what your perception is of data governance, because I think a very stiff, rigid, cold version of it. And I listened to an episode of the Be Data Driven Kyle Winterbottom's podcast the other day, and he had someone talking about data governance. And I was like, oh my gosh, for the first time, this sounds way more interesting. So can you tell us about it? Maybe make it more interesting than the cold textbook version?
Yeah, I think how I see data governance is you have your business strategy and your data strategy, and data governance just enables that. It's a pillar. So instead of wasting time with kind of going to different people in different departments, you have a set of standards that everyone can follow, and it just enables data quality. It makes sure that there aren't a ton of mistakes made, that people know what they can and what they can't do. And people often think that like data governance inhibits what they are able to do. And in some situations it might, but in most situations it just enables you more, because it makes sure the data is clean. It makes sure what you're working off is right. And it reduces risk. It reduces the fact that like maybe you'll build something and then it will create a horrible outcome. Like, for example, like the Zillow machine learning algorithm that lost them like $25 million. I don't know what it was, but that if they had proper data governance and standards against their models, that could potentially have avoided it. I don't know specifically, but data governance is just, it's like a linchpin in making sure that your data is effective.
So what size businesses do you generally work with?
So currently, most of my clients are in the billions of pounds range. So we work at Red Kite. We primarily work with CPG, FMCG, which is like the food space. A lot of retail as well. One of my main clients right now is media, though, and so these are large companies. These are huge companies, usually listed on the stock exchange. Tons of over thousands of employees, and primarily in the UK, but we do work with international clients as well.
So I'm curious for, people who are data analysts who are really siloed in a data department, or smaller companies who are, really just kind of going from 0 to 1. From your perspective, having like seen the strategy all the way up at that level, what would be your advice all the way down to, like all the way down here?
all the way down here to like what, the companies or the analysts?
I mean, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is like I feel like there's this commonality that I'm finding where like smaller companies and analysts who are kind of silent in data departments are kind of just heads down on like, we just need to like, this Excel spreadsheet needs to be right. And we just need it like this value needs to show up correctly on this dashboard, or it needs to come through correctly into this report. And there's not a lot of groundwork being laid, like you had said, like the cross department stuff. But I've started to realize that if you can, at that level, start to think forward of like what would be coming next for your team, like if you're an analyst, or for like the business, because I work with a lot of small clients. If somebody could just like, somebody who was like 5 steps ahead could say, okay, watch out for this, it would be super helpful. So, but I don't know what that thing is. I don't know how to ask. This isn't like a guided question of like, I know what I'm asking you.
Yeah.
But I just know that I know that you know things that you could tell me that I don't know.
I think, yeah, I'm kind of getting where you're going. And I think the biggest thing for especially like a data analyst in a siloed organization or something like that is understand the business use cases, so that you aren't head down doing the same thing over and over again, and figure out where you can add value in that realm based on your skill set. Is it automating something? Is it, but before you do it, is it a dashboard? But before you do any of that, like talk to the stakeholders and be like, is this something you would use? Like, or am I just wasting my time? Like, how can I make your life better? And just having those conversations, it just opens up projects, and it opens up opportunities to deliver value. And I think that delivering value piece, seeing your work actually be used, is why people stay at companies. It's why people enjoy the data realm. Not if you deliver something and no one uses it, and you're like, I don't want to be here anymore. Like, stuff I'm doing is not relevant anymore. And even if you're paid a healthy sum, you might go somewhere else because you want to actually feel like your work is valued. So that's my thing is make sure you have the use cases for what you want to build. And then the other side to it as well is make sure the fundamentals are there. Like the data is clean, it's usable, where it's coming from, that stuff. But that is a bit more kind of managerial, data CDO, head tech lead kind of level.
You obviously have a lot of visibility in your role. Like, do you work with a lot of like CEOs, CDOs, CFOs?
So mostly CDOs. I think that's where the buck kind of stops. CDOs, CIOs, and CTOs for a lot of data work. But when you actually start with a data strategy, you do get those other businesses brought in. So the CDO is usually the end stakeholder for a lot of data delivery work. But for example, if the strategy I'm working on for this media company right now is we're talking to the CEO and the CFO and the salespeople and kind of everybody, because we want to know how this data program and the new data analytics program can actually deliver value. And you can't do that by just talking to the data team. So you work directly with the data team, but you actually deliver for the whole business.
Yeah, that concept that you said about like actually delivering value is an interesting thing. We've talked about this off the stream before. Like I've said, like as an analyst, when you go to write your resume, like is everyone just making this stuff up? Like how do you like, for a lot of analysts, I mean, as a consultant, I fortunately can say like I helped a client find $100,000 in lost revenue, and that's like a very concrete thing. But I think a lot of analysts like probably facing the same challenges as their managers of like, how do we articulate the value of what we're doing? It's valuable. But do you find that you have to kind of help people figure out how to articulate the value of an analytics team?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Is that like your whole job?
That was actually one of my projects. I did a project for another media agency like a few months ago, and the whole project was actually just like, they have a bunch of use cases. What's the value of them? Like, what is the monetary value we can actually deliver from this stuff? And getting that was a pain, because no one wanted to put a number against it. They didn't want to be like, I'm going to say it's going to save it's going to drive 2 million pounds in extra revenue. But they didn't want to say that because they would be signing themselves up to deliver that 2 million pounds. So you have to kind of play with it, show them the logical path, and make sure that like you're assessing the right forms of value. And I think even for like an analyst or a data scientist or anybody really, look at all the monetary benefits and the non-monetary benefits and kind of estimate, size it up, but like size them up in a logical way. So if you're going to drive this much revenue, that revenue is based off of your hourly ad rate of say $1 times an increase in 100 streaming hours per month. So that's kind of that's how you get to it. So just show the process of getting to it and make sure that that is underlined by logic. It could be estimates, but as long as it's like, as long as you have that logical flow, that's the best you can kind of ask for.
So do you help companies get set up, like if they don't really have a super great analytics department, like do you help them set that up, or do you come into like existing analytics teams to like revamp? Like where's your role in that?
So it's a bit of both. So we do at Red Kite, we have capabilities across all the different areas. So we do have like an organization and people role as well. We do outsource as well, or we do delivery for clients. So if they need a BI dashboard, whatever. But like my role going into projects is usually how do you tie it all together? So if they don't have a team, which a lot of times they don't, it's like, okay, what kind of team do you need? Do you need this many analysts? Do you need this many tech leads, this many engineers, governance people? What team do you need to fulfill your use cases and your tasks? And then we also look at like other stuff like technology, like what tech stack do you need? Like you don't need some of this stuff, like, but you might want, you need storage or something like that, right? So you just kind of aligning on those things. Then there's a whole host of other things like processes, like how does the data flow from source to consumption, and like what assets do you even have in the organization? So my role is to kind of plan and scope out the high level for all of that, and then help them dive into it. But then that is kind of where I hand off to an expert in technology. Like I'm not an expert in technology. They would kind of deal with that, or people, like what are the roles and competencies and responsibilities that we need to build for this. And it all depends on the client. Like some are more mature than others, but you have to scope it out for their own organization and customize it for their own organization.
And do you think, are people usually looking for like a quick, fast return on doing that?
Who isn't? I don't know. I mean, yeah, but people are realistic. People are way more realistic now. They know that like data is not cheap. They know data is not easy or quick. But at the same time, people do need to drive results. So there is that push and pull of it. And honestly, managing that is always a tough thing, but you have to be realistic and you have to also just push in one direction as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read something the other day about like how we kind of vilify executives for needing like quick, short answers and being very pushy about things. But they're like, from the perspective of an executive, if you say you're going to meet a target and you go into the boardroom and you haven't met it, you probably have one more chance, and then that's it. And that's really interesting to think about that.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Like, and then it makes more sense to articulate yourself into that, because it, like I think that especially like I'm in the entry level space a lot on LinkedIn. So you hear people talking a lot about how like, oh, if they would just hire me and give me a chance, they'd see that I'm a great analyst. And that's great. And I'm all for like feel good stories, but like, it makes sense to put yourself in the shoes of the executive and be like, but in 6 months, I have this target I need to meet, or like my head's on the chopping block.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes down, right? I mean, I've hired a ton of people before. And so if I were to hire somebody onto my team, and I would need to prove the value of that person. So what is the business case for me hiring this new data analyst? And this person is going to drive this metric or this project. And that is kind of then what you look for and you base against when you hire a person. Like they have to deliver that value. So it's not like everyone goes willy-nilly hiring all these people because they think they might have something for them. It's like we need to drive a return on this person that we're hiring and we need that resource against it. So it is quite hard to manage. And I think for executives, especially now, they don't know the value and the return on a lot of data. And that is the case. So that's especially the case for entry level analysts who have never worked that way before. So they need to defer to their team to hire that way. And it's a tough thing to do.
So when you're hiring analysts, what is it that you're looking for?
So I've never hired a data analyst per se. I've hired and interviewed data people, but they are consultants. So it is different. So I'm going to caveat with that.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest things for me is one, like, okay, you can do the fundamentals right. If it is a data focused role, you can either do SQL or Python or whatever. Okay, I'll trust you on that, based on kind of your credentials, your projects that you've done in the past, your past roles. But then that's kind of like that baseline. And then after that, I think the three things I look for is like one, communication, and you can usually suss that out in the interview. How are they talking? Are they rambling? Are they concise? How are they conveying what they can do? And how do they write it as well, to a lesser degree if they do like a case presentation, which happens a lot in consulting. So that case presentation is like more the storytelling aspect of how they're actually telling the story, displaying the implications and getting to the insights rather than saying top line takeaways. The second thing is initiative. This is something that I love to look for in consulting, because in the data world and the consulting world, you need to take initiative to grow and to achieve like great things. So looking for that in projects that people do outside of work, or things they volunteer for, or things they're passionate about that they've really taken to the next level, that kind of speaks volumes. Or even in their job too, if they've gone above and beyond the role description, and just kind of, you can tell that in the interview. It's harder to tell on a resume, because everyone has gone above and beyond the role description on a resume. It's not.
Yeah.
And then the biggest thing is like strategic thinking and problem solving. And you would think coding, you'd have that because you're coding and it's very logical problem solving. But it's about seeing, as I mentioned before, the bigger picture and being strategic about how you do things. Like, are you just doing it because someone told you to do it, or are you doing it because it makes sense? And are you going from point A to point F in a logical manner? So you can really, after being on my side of the interview table quite a bit, you can deduce how people go from how their logic flows and how they solve a problem. And that really kind of paints a big picture of whether they can do that on a recurring basis and do it quickly as well. Because the last thing I'll say about that is, like, in consulting, you need to do things fast. And then you also work a lot with ambiguity, which a lot of people have trouble with. So you have to suss that out, because it's a key facet of the job.
Yeah, I last week posted a quote in the wrong order, and like 5 people were like, "Amazing, Annie, so insightful," and you were like, "Nope." I had said, like, what did I say? I said that the people who only know the why will always be working for the people who know the how.
Yeah.
And you came and you were like, "No, I think you got that the wrong way around."
Because it is exactly. and you post a lot, so I've made those mistakes too.
Yeah,
I think that is another skill that is overlooked often, is attention to detail. That was one of my biggest weaknesses coming out of university and going into consulting. And there was like a few mistakes on my presentations, a few mistakes that went to the partners, and like they got called out. And so you have to be like, okay, actually, you know what? I really need to double down on this. And now it's one of my strengths. And I think that detail is so important for entry level people as well, because if you can prove that like you don't have any errors in your stuff, it goes a long way in saying like this person's ready for the next level.
Another important thing, I think, is being able to respond well to errors. So like I had a portfolio piece that I presented in a panel interview, which for the job that I'm at now. And I believe that I had forgotten to like synchronize a dual axis in Tableau or something. I was still new to it. And someone had brought it up. They had asked about it. And I think that I I honestly kind of blacked out the whole interview. I was so nervous. I don't really remember it. But from what I have heard, I had said like, "Oh, that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to look into that, and I'll get back to you on it." And I heard as a follow-up later that they had actually really liked that I had been able to like take that feedback, especially because as a consultant where I'm building Tableau dashboards, there's going to be like little things that I miss when I'm just showing a prototype, and being able to take that feedback and not just like immediately dig in and be like, this is the right answer, or like get completely flustered and off track because of this little thing, and be able to respond to it and move on, I guess was an impressive part of it. Was actually a mark in my favor.
Well, you recognize what you need to do, right? It's not like I can't fix this on the spot, but like I'll take a look and I'll let you know what the error is. And I've done that before in client conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I think responding to like those kinds of questions and scenarios is a really, really important skill. And it's one thing that I think you gain in consulting because you're so often in that position, either with internally or externally with clients. And I don't think it's a skill, unfortunately, that like data scientists, analysts, engineers get as much because they're kind of more on the back end of stuff and they're building. But it is something you should always seek out and like responding to questions and being able to think on your feet.
This is an interesting question. I think maybe the opposite. Do you think general business strategists will become less relevant as companies become more data driven by working with data teams directly? I think maybe just general, but like I think your role is going to be like more and more important. What do you think?
It will be. It's funny. I think I forget who it was. So posted on I think it was Consulting Humor actually, was saying the reason why our jobs will never go away is because you try explaining to the client how to do something or try to organize their processes in a way that works for them. And that will maintain, that will still be a thing. I think a lot more general business strategists will need data function or data skills. So I completely agree, Daniel. I think that will be important. But there's always the working with stakeholders, the getting them on your side, the helping them figure it out and get through the process. That stuff you'll still need, and I don't think that could ever really be replaced by AI. If AI were replace that too, like that, then we're done, like game over. But and then the other side of it too is a big chunk of business strategists aren't in pure strategy; they're in change management and transformation, and that area I think is actually going to start booming more because I think there's a big gap between companies and their data goals and their actual ability to do transformation and transform into a more data-driven company. So, and that does not sit in the data team. It never will.
Yeah. That's an interesting point about like, who in the data team is overseeing the strategy. And what I've seen recently is that a lot of companies are getting these kind of self-service analytic platforms like, oh, you don't need to work with a Tableau consultant or whatever, because you can just like get a dashboard that's made, or like no code this thing. And I think that's great. And I think that I love that people are being empowered to be able to access their own data. However, I think that almost every single client that comes to me and they say, this is what I want, I feed them back, I hear you, but this is what you want. And so I'm curious about your perspective on this, like kind of self-serve analytics, like revolution. And if people are even going to notice that, like, they're not getting the full value, like, what do you think about that?
Well, I can tell you what all my clients say is one of the biggest priorities is to get self-serve, but like a Tableau dashboard is not self-serve. It's only self-serve if it's built for the right purposes, if the data is clean, if it's built in the right way. And in a lot of different companies, it's not. So it's really hard for, I think the marketing budgets of a lot of these companies, a lot of these like tooling companies are a lot more effective than their actual products. Sorry to say to any of them, but there's still a lot of process behind it. It's still about getting people on the same page, getting them to use data and to think about things differently because they're used to doing their things for so many years in the same way. How do you get them to change? And that is not about putting a product in front of them. That's about coaching them along the process and helping them understand what self-serve actually means for their job and how they can deliver better results via that.
I think that circles us back to the data governance thing too, because it has to be clean and coming from the right place and everything in order to, oh, my screen froze. I hope it was.
No, you're good. You're good.
Connection. But do you agree that kind of almost circles us back to the data governance?
Yeah, the screen's loading.
Turn my Wi-Fi off on my phone. I don't know if it's my connection.
I think it. Silo.
I don't know if it's my connection or yours, but you're definitely totally this blurred out, frozen blob. There we go. I see you moving again.
It's my connection, Joe. Hey, okay. I'll trust you, Joe. I'll test it right now.
Yeah, I've had to ask the chat before. I had one chat where my boyfriend was home and he was in the other room and he was like watching something and I had to he was like not in a good mood either. And I had to run over and be like, hey, can you not do that? Because like I need all of the bandwidth right now.
Oh yeah, it's definitely not mine. I'm at like 4. I'm almost at 500 megabytes per second. So.
Oh well,
the one time where London internet actually works. London internet is horrible for all those wondering.
Yeah, that was actually another question that I had. So you were in Toronto and now you're in the UK, which I don't know about Canada's kind of labor policies. I imagine they're better than the States, but like you were backpacking and everything. Like, do you feel like you get to, with the job you're in and you're working with big clients, do you still get to like be your whole self and do things? Like I saw you got engaged recently. Congratulations. Like, do you get to be your whole self or do you kind of like have to just be this person now?
No, I think it depends on the culture of the organization. So my company is really open to people being themselves. They're really open to like people taking time off. Great benefits as well, which I really enjoy. So I feel totally empowered to be my own person. I think it's important to be your own person in the workplace, and like because you bring your own niche, you bring your own kind of competitive advantage, and you have to figure out what that is. For me, it's like I'm quite confident, extroverted, and I really like helping people and stuff. So I bring that totally to what I do. There's also some negatives that I bring that I know I bring. Sometimes I can come off as arrogant, so I also have to tone that down. So it's about recognizing as well your pros and cons and bringing that into the right thing. The other thing I'd say is like there is a level of professionalism you have to have, especially in a client setting. So I will switch to being like, okay, I'm Dylan. I'm data strategist. I am lead consultant. I know my stuff, and like become very professional in that way because I know I need to be. And I learned that when I was in my young 20s in consulting. I was in kind of rooms with CEOs and such, and I didn't even have the scruff, and I have a very, very baby face. So I looked like I was 16. I was telling these like 60-year-olds to like reimagine their business, to use Amazon, to like do digital transformation. Mm-hmm. And I just like felt like they didn't take me seriously. So you really do have to cater to your environment. And that's just the way things work. And that's the way things always will work, right? People who are older will look at people who are younger and be like, well, you don't have the experience that I do. You don't know the things I do. And it is true. Like as much as like someone who's 23 is like super smart, super gung-ho, knows a ton of stuff, you haven't worked 7 years in consulting like I have or something like that. So you don't know as much about these things than I do. I will happily pass them on to you, but like you have to recognize your faults and your pros and your cons, your faults, your defaults.
Mm-hmm. Something that I've realized that I want to look for myself, like in the future, something that I've realized is important to me is working at companies where the CEO is humble and has humility. When I started my job search, I had never worked in kind of a corporate setting before, so I really had no idea what I was looking for. Like I had just done a lot of things working with kids. Like that was it. But now that I feel like I'm doing these jobs where I'm part of an organization and I'm really trying to help the business accomplish their goals, and like I really have to believe in the CEO's vision. Um, I think that's like a big number one. And everyone has different things. Some people want a CEO that's more everything, like very, very out there and aggressive. Some people look for that. But I think that I personally want to work somewhere that the CEO is humble and has kind of gotten that depth of experience and time, because I'm realizing that like that time in the industry making the mistakes is valuable.
Yeah. The thing I'd add on to that, I completely agree, and it really helps. I think instead of CEO, focus on the leadership, because it's often not always the CEO. It can be leadership that drives everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of the person who you work most closely with, like focus on making sure that you're working with your manager is empowering. Your manager is humble. Your manager will teach you those things because that's who you work most closely with and will learn the most from. And a bad manager is just like, it's not helpful for anybody, and will put you down and it'll put you back in your career. So just always look to who it would I be reporting to? How do they work? Are they vulnerable? Do they help, like helping people? Because you live and die by who you work closely with.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that my manager right now is really excellent, and he's taught me a lot of things. And like, definitely, like if I have a tough situation, I know that like he's got my back and he's going to support me. And like, not that he's going to baby me, but it's been like a really big deal. I One thing that I was asking before that I was curious about, like, do you actually get the time to like go out and like do things outdoors still, or do you have to work a lot?
No, so this is what you mentioned about Canada, the US, and the UK. So
Mhm.
in the UK, you tend to work less hours than the US for sure. In consulting in the US, it's probably 10 to 12 or 10 to 14 per day. I usually work 8-hour days, and my company's pretty strict about that, which I love.
Mhm.
So I do activities outside, and I also actually tend to go. I hope no clients are on the call, but I tend to go to like the gym during the day as well, or like biking in the mornings or something like that, because I want that physical activity to break up my day.
Mhm.
Again, I do start early in the morning. I start at like 7 usually, and then go to the gym for a couple hours midday, because that helps me then re-energize and think better in the afternoon.
Mhm.
So I'm able to do it, and it's a beautiful day out today. Went for a run yesterday. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm coming to the UK this summer, and my boyfriend was like, "Of course, like I'm sure the 10 days that we're there, it's either gonna pour the whole time and you're gonna be like, why did we come here? Or it's gonna be beautiful the whole time and you're gonna be like, what are you talking about? It doesn't rain here ever."
Yeah, it's a bit of both. You enjoy
Um,
the sun when you get it.
yeah, yeah. So I'm curious about culture. You talked about culture, but if you're advising on like data strategy, are you ever talking to people about the culture of the organization?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it is everything. So is the culture of the organization. So outside of the data team, are people making decisions based on their gut feel, or are they making decisions based on the data? Especially for, like, I work in CPG a lot and FMCG. Like, you have a lot of data access to you. You know what the sales were of the products, like how it ties back to the promotional campaigns. And if you're not using that properly, then you can tell that like the culture of the organization is more gut feel and it's based on experience, which is fine. Like, people's experience is often right. But if you are just basing off experiences, it's hard to grow. It's hard to evolve as an organization. And culture is so hard because organizations don't know how to instill it, like especially the data culture. Like, they think, oh, we'll do a 1-day event on data literacy, or we'll do an online course that's mandatory for everybody. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, that's not going to help. Like, that's not going to do anything. You have to empower people. You have to show them what will work. You have to work with individuals closely, and then let those people champion it afterwards.
Mhm.
So I see it all the time in the clients we work with. And one of the questions I have in most of my business interviews, my strategic business interviews, are like, what's the culture of the organization? Are you comfortable? Are people comfortable working with data and making data driven decisions? And often it's like, yeah, but they don't really push for it. They don't want it. They just have it if it's available to them.
So how would you go about, like, if you realize that a lot of the people, especially in management roles and decision-making roles, did not have great data literacy and they didn't really feel empowered. And if you hit them with anything more than a simple bar chart, they would immediately be completely overwhelmed. Like, or they don't even understand like what the fields actually mean that really drive like what they're actually doing. How do you tackle that? Like, that's probably not an easy change to make. Like you said, you can't just do a 1-day course.
No, it's not. But you start with what they do on their day. Like, okay, you don't know what the data means, but like, what do you do? Oh, I sell laundry detergent because I work at Tide and I want to make sure our sales go up. It's like, okay, how do we enable that with data? We will look at X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, how do you make that decision? And they're like, oh, well, I make that decision based on sales, based on like customers, based on what the media agency tells me. And then you kind of go through that process and you get them down to that like foundational point of like, oh, you know what? Data is actually helpful here. Let's see how that can help. Let's build a tool that can do that. Do you think that would help? And they're like, oh yeah, I think that would be really helpful. I mean, most people aren't like that oblivious to it. But like, it's the process of just getting to like the lowest common denominator between their business and role and data and like what data can offer. And if you do that, then it really helps bring people along. They're like, oh, I actually want to learn how to use Tableau, or I want to figure out how to do this. And yeah.
It's interesting because it's just, like I work with a lot of smaller to medium-sized businesses, and I've definitely had people be like, oh, well, I'm not a data person. It's like, well, you need data, and bridging that gap, especially because for me, like, we have clients who come to us and they maybe buy 80-hour bucket or something and they want something accomplished. And so it's like this decision of like, am I going to spend the time to help them with data literacy and like invest in helping them to feel like they can empower them to use their data? Or am I just going to accomplish what they have purchased the hours for?
Yeah, it's tough. And that goes back to the, will consultants ever be replaced? It's like when clients know what they need to ask for, maybe, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah. So what do the interviews for a position like yours look like?
So, I mean, typically you have kind of behavioral interviews, which is a lot of like telling your story, how you deal in certain situations, strengths, weaknesses. So that's super important. And then the differentiator for consulting is a case interview. So usually, and what I was given when I interviewed for Red Kite was a data set. And it's like, okay, build a PowerPoint document based on this data set and get some insights out of it. And I think that the differentiator there and that why it's so popular is case interviews is because it shows the level of depth that you are able to get to for the insights that you have. So if you say like, oh, sales are down, I'm not going to hire you. If you say sales are down because this happened and therefore we need to invest further in that. That is insightful. It draws out the implication and you actually have go forward action steps of what to do. And so that is kind of what you're looking for. And that's the process. Then the other thing in a lot of consulting firms as well is they do case interviews on the spot. So it's not a take home. It's okay, let's solve this problem together, working together. And there's a lot of estimates involved, but it's about seeing how you think and understanding, okay, that person puts 2 and 2 equals 4 very logically together, not like 2 plus 0.5 plus 0.3 plus 0.2, and in a way that doesn't actually work and is like not very logical. So it's about understanding how the person thinks, and that's how you interview in consulting.
That's interesting. So at your actual day-to-day, how much time do you spend actually looking at actual data and digging into actual data versus all the other stuff?
Oh, I don't spend any time looking at data. That's my trade secret right there. I haven't opened my RIDE in I think almost a year, and I do want to, but like there's so much going on, LinkedIn content stuff, all that other fun stuff. And at work, like I'm not the one who's paid to write SQL or Python queries. I'm the one who's paid to think about why you're writing the Python SQL queries, and none of that exists in Python or SQL IDE. So,
so what does a normal day look like for you? Is it a lot of meetings? Is it like literally just time to think and write notes? Like,
I wish. No, I think like right now I'm on a very intensive project where we're doing a lot of stakeholder interviews. So we're doing about 20 to 30 stakeholder interviews, understanding kind of what the business needs are. So being on those interviews, hour-long conversations with, like, as I mentioned, CEO, CFO, understanding what they want, what they can use, how they can use data better, and how it integrates within the organization. And then during those breaks, it's kind of collating those interviews, understanding what they said, drawing out themes, and putting together kind of a report to say, like, okay, this is where we're at as a business right now. How do we use this to get better? And at the same time for this project, I'm currently also working with my team, and this is all not me, by the way. This is me and 3 other people, but to put out a data maturity survey. So we're surveying these same people and a lot more via Microsoft Forms and Power BI to understand where they are at in terms of their maturity of their data assets, their data governance, their technology, all these different things, so that we can set a baseline of like, okay, this is where you're at, and this is where you need to get to deliver these use cases.
So that data maturity survey, did you come up with that? Like, is that something you've used with other clients? Did you come up with it just for this one?
Yeah, no, we've used it before. We've turned, so you get it kind of in the qualitative conversations, you talk about the maturity, but then you also doing this quantitative side adds both aspects to it. And so we use it pretty much with a lot of our data strategy projects because it is a good baseline for people to understand where their organization is at and get some agreement, consensus. And that consensus is so important when you get perspectives from 200 people that all director level and above, then it's like, okay, shit, we actually need to do something with this. If it's like at a 1 maturity. And then the other thing we try to do is we compare it against benchmarks of competitors in the space. And that really is impactful because you know, okay, I'm doing 1 and my competitor is doing 3 in terms of our maturity of 5. Like, I really need to step up my game. And that really makes people be like, okay, we're going to listen. We're going to create this data strategy. We're going to actually action it and go through these things. So it's a very effective way of getting things done, improving, getting past the politics, getting past the hesitancy within organizations.
That's really interesting. Like this cohort analysis that you're able to do. I'm working for one of my clients right now on something that I like suggested a cohort analysis, and it's so interesting that you've been able to like apply that to like what you're actually doing. Like I love seeing that you're doing data-driven work as much as you're helping them do data-driven work, you know, because I think that I realized that a lot of consulting orgs are just out there doing it and they're not data-driven. They're helping their clients be data-driven. Sounds like you guys do both.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, right? It's or walk the talk or whatever. So making sure that what we are, and the thing I have to say as well that is worth noting is like these interviews, that's data, right? We are using data. It's qualitative data that we ascertain through conversation, and that is feeding into the recommendations. So that is also important to make sure that what we come to at the end is something that our stakeholders want and agree on, and that will actually drive impact through it for the organization. And I think the biggest thing there too is like making sure it's data driven, but making sure everyone's along for the ride and journey. And that's the important thing about talking to these people and doing the survey is that people know what's going on and know the direction they're heading.
You kind of get like that short-term return of like, look very clearly, like if you know, this is one reason I think you should come along with me, and hopefully people come along. Do you ever feel like the need to kind of put out any short-term returns on the actual strategy stuff? Or are you saying, hey, this is a long game we're playing here?
You have to have touch points. So touch points with your stakeholders is key. And I think that's true of any project. So any data person, you should have touch points where you're iterating, you're working with your stakeholders. For example, when we do this interview report, there's gonna be a lot of feedback. we'll workshop it, we'll understand the themes, we'll understand what people think about the themes, how we can improve on those as an organization. And it's the same thing as like if you're a data analyst building a dashboard, you need to have those touch points on a fairly structured basis to get to the best outcome, because you can't get to the best outcome by just like going off in a room and doing stuff for 8 weeks and then coming back. You have to iterate and you have to work with the key people to get to that point.
Do you ever get nervous when you get a new client that you're just not going to know anything?
I mean, now I'm like, so I've been in the like consulting for 6 years and I've worked across like probably 20 different industries. So I have a good sense of how every company works. But like even right now, like the company I'm working with is they do a lot of M&A and they buy a lot of companies and they have a ton of different like brands within it. And it's really hard to understand their business model. So I do kind of like sometimes I go into these conversations, I'm like, I don't know anything. But like that's why you have them. You're like, can you, person who works in that company who really understands what you do, explain that to me as if I'm a 5-year-old? And then that allows you to connect the dots a lot easier. And that's what your job is. Your job is not to be the expert of knowing the company and the organization inside out. Your job is to help that company from a third person perspective build and deliver on the goals that they want to achieve. And luckily, while bringing in your expertise from like a data strategy perspective or whatever your role is.
Do you feel like because you've done all this, you are really comfortable understanding like your value in general as a candidate? Like if you were to get laid off or you were to suddenly have a lot of changes and not like your job anymore, do you feel like you now have this sense of like really who you are as a candidate and like what you're worth?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I actually think LinkedIn helped a lot with that of me understanding my value and the value of data strategy in today's world, or even thinking strategically about data and knowing how it works and the symbiotic nature of it. And I think for me to get to that point, it was really about reflecting on what I've done, what I bring that others don't, and writing that stuff down. Like I now know what my niche is. I know most people don't have that niche. And that niche can be whatever you want it to be. It's different for every person, but like even writing it down, understanding it, marking what your strengths are really helps you internalize it. And that kind of helps be more confident in like, okay, actually, you know what? I deserve to be paid this much in this market and this at this job. And I think it's hard to get to, and it tends to come after like 3 to 5 years experience, because that gives you a lot more understanding of that role that you do and what you are good at and what you aren't good at.
So is this kind of what you're doing right now, kind of your plan for the foreseeable future? Or do you have like a next step? Like, would you want to be a CDO like after this, or this is kind of what you're jamming on right now?
I'm totally jamming right now. I love the company I'm at. I've been there for about 6 months now. They are really great. And what I'm doing, what I'm helping build with my colleagues in the data strategy realm, like there's only a couple of us, but what we're really trying to build out a new capability is a lot of fun. And it's right where I think my expertise is. I don't have enough expertise to be a CDO, nor do I want to be right now, because I think it's something that I don't have the skills or knowledge of at this point. Maybe one day, but I think I have a lot more to learn being a consultant and learning as a consultant. And like that's the beauty of being in consulting, is like you get to see every CDO across every company in this industry, what their problems are. So you're like, okay, now I know how to solve all those problems. Like when I do it, it'll be easy. It'll be a piece of cake.
Yeah, really collecting data on that. I've had people ask me like, after consulting, do you want to go into an FTE role? Like there's been instability with my role lately that's been like affecting my ability to get my paycheck at the end of the month and stuff. And people are like, well, what about an FTE, like FTE, full-time employee role? But I just learned so much from consulting. Like I've had now, I think almost 20 clients. I've only been at my job for, I think, like 10 months. I've had a bunch of clients and they've been across all these industries, and I get to see they have their own unique tech stack and way of doing things and culture, which is really interesting. I learned so much from it.
Yeah, exactly.
Each of these different ones. You seem like you have bigger engagements than I do. Like I might have 5 clients in a week. How many clients like do you have kind of at a time?
I typically I mean, how we run is you usually are full-time on one client.
Mhm.
So I don't have a lot more, but I am a lot involved in BD, so business development, proposal building, or even just pulled in as a data strategy SME. So it is kind of a mixed bag, and it depends on the person. But a lot of people, especially if you're a data consultant, you're usually full-time on one client because you're building all the time and you don't have time to go off and do other things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, wait, what time is it for you? It's 2:00 for me.
It's 7:00 here.
Okay. Well, we did it. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, really, really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
The chat was pretty active, so thanks everybody who came to our chat. And David, if you're still listening, yeah, they're basically weekly and it is recorded, so you can catch the rest of it later. So,
yeah.
bye everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.
And it says it's